Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. It sounds like you spent quite a bit of time putting together, coordinating your statements or your testimony today. But I find a few areas where I'm not exactly clear on what you want to communicate with me when you say that Section 28004 requires abstinence only. Because I'm looking at the Senate Bill 1 from 1995 and Senate Bill 283 from 2009, and neither of them require abstinence only.
And you're correct. If you heard any of us say abstinence only, we didn't intend that. What we need to, it says that we must devote more attention to abstinence than any other sexual behavior. And if you notice, there are 5 components. One of them is contraception, and the other 4 talks about how abstinence is to be taught. And so we're not advocating for abstinence only, we're advocating for basically abstinence plus. Now, also the law, if you go back to 28.004 Section A, Section A is where it says that it is the local community values that are supposed to determine whether or not sex ed is taught, whether or not health is taught, and how that should work. And so it's not supposed to be at the Texas-wide level that determines it. It's supposed to be driven by local community values. And so a local community could say, we only want abstinence only, which is what Debbie talked about, because that's what they prefer for their community. Or another community could say, we want abstinence plus. What the law, I believe, says, and I'm not a lawyer, but it's pretty simple language, is that if you are not spending time on abstinence, then you're not in compliance with 28.004.
Right, then don't do it at all. Right, ultimately. And so my question then becomes, because you said that it should be based on local community values. But when we look at Texas being 4th in the nation for teen births and 1st in the nation for multiple teen births, and we look at 66% of all births by females under 20 are Latinas, and when we look at the number of high school students that are reporting sexual assaults are above the national average. Why in the world would we not want to include this? Because when you say something like this pertains only to the local community, it's costing taxpayers at least $1 billion annually. And whether you want that in your community or not, it doesn't mean it's not going to exist. And whether you want to include this curriculum in your classroom or your local community schools doesn't mean that you're not still spending $1 million or losing $1 billion in revenue annually. Why would we not want this included for all students? Because the law does not say that you have to expose your children to education that morally and religiously you don't want to expose your children to. So it's not usurping parental rights. You have the right to opt out. But why in the world would we not want to include this, considering the fact that it's costing all Texans annually at least $1 billion?
Those are really good questions, and I have a lot of material I can provide you on those specific things, but I'd mention 2 things. Debbie specifically talked about, if you actually look at the performance of these sexual risk reduction programs, they're negative. So we have to really be honest about what we are looking at and make sure that the programs we choose actually are measuring the right things and encouraging the right behaviors and outcomes. But
aren't those decisions made by your shack and not by the state? Because that's your local community values, right?
Could you rephrase that a little bit differently?
Okay, so when you're saying when we're looking at the risk reduction programs that we're implementing in schools, those are selected by your shack, correct?
Okay,
yes,
and I will say we have 2 problems, and I'll be the first to admit it, because I'm in Northeast ISD, and I've been working to try to. I believe that not only them, but several districts are in violation of 28.004, and in my school district, parents that have conservative values are eliminated from the process, and I've gone through grievances, and I've got all kinds of documentation to show how we are being excluded from the process. Our shack meetings are closed. If I wanted to just solve that problem, I'd say Texas solved that problem for me, but I believe in decentralization, and I'm working to solve that problem locally. But what I found is that local community values are not currently being reflected in a lot of districts, and so that you'll notice that there were a lot of bills this last session that focused on transparency for parents. They made it through the Senate, but they didn't make it through the House. So I would say that there are two issues here. The shacks are not functioning properly, and we need some help with enforcement of 28.004, which I'm told is not within your purview. And then the second thing is related to the birth rates that you mentioned. I have an analytic background, and I have done a lot of research. I want you to think about the fact that we are a pro-life state, and that's an objective measure. If you go out and you look at all the states and you line up, how many pro-life laws and what types of pro-life laws they have, what you will find is the pro-life states are going to have a higher birth rate, because when our teenagers get pregnant, they are more apt to choose life for their baby. Whereas if you are in a less pro-life state, you are not going to have a recorded birth because the child isn't brought into the world. And so we have to be really careful when you use that birth rate as a metric. You're really encouraging more abortion, but if we are a pro-life state, which objectively we are when you look at our laws, we should not be surprised to see that we have higher than average birth rates, because we are going to be more apt to bring those children into the world. Now, I'm not saying that we shouldn't help decrease teen pregnancy. Absolutely we should. But the teen pregnancy numbers are different. And I have a graph I'd be happy to send. I was going to bring it today, but I was told to say stay away from that topic. But I think it is important, because I know that's one of the reasons that you want to address this issue. But we have to make sure we're addressing it properly, and that it is for the proper health of the students. And there's a CDC report that came out a couple years ago that talks about all the different risk avoidance activities that children have, and that they are more apt to wear their seatbelt. They're more apt to eat breakfast in the morning if they abstain from sexual activity. There's a ton of data out there. You just have to choose to look at it.
Well, I want to be clear before we move on that by me telling you these birth rates, it is not at all discussing pro-life or pro-choice. It's just immutable fact, right?
But it does inform decision.
Thank you. But what I'm stating is that when we're looking at the annual cost and then the lack of access to escape poverty because of these choices, I still don't understand, and I'm still not hearing your justification for eliminating this kind of education for our young people. It's stating that because we're a pro-life state is the reason that we're number one for multiple teen births in our young in teenagers. Those two things just don't reconcile. And when we look at the cost to the state today and in the future, there's still no justification to eliminate this kind of education. So it's not about pro-life or pro-choice, but perhaps it's about postponing this decision. Right? And so the best way to postpone it is to have all of the education available to you, and not partial education available to you because of what the community next door might think, or the lady across the street might think. All of the education and actual practical education rather than theoretical education available to all students, which I believe is what my colleagues were going for when they were asking questions along the same lines. I still don't hear why we should not provide this for all students, except for the fact that some parents don't want it. Fine, those parents can opt out.
And I'd just like to go back to that we have this wonderful legislative process for a reason. You guys are voted into your positions, just like our senators, our House of Representatives, and we have legislation that legislates this very important section because we know it's important and it connects to religious and moral values of families. And so I would just really implore you that if you feel like the legislation is wrong, let's go through the process to change the legislation. And since we have legislation, let's follow it. And then it is an enrichment topic, and so there are other ways to potentially handle this. I do opt my children out. I have 3 boys, and I have a 2-year-old, so I'm going to be going through this for a long time. I do opt my children out, and I'm very happy to have that choice. But when I look at what is the healthiest for all children, their abstinence plus is the most healthy. And you said it very, very well. You said, why wouldn't we give all the information but educate? And what we're trying to mention to you is there are unintended consequences for a lot of the language that is being used in here, because it is language that is coined by a sexual risk reduction, that if you actually look at the curriculums, like the curriculum that's currently in my school district, which I am fighting about with the district and with the TEA, you can't find abstinence in it at all. And so that's not all the information, right? So that's the issue. So you're not wrong.